Okay, I think we'll make a start. You're all very welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Mark Spence. I'm Managing Director of Construction Employers Federation, and you're all very welcome to this webinar. Thank you for attending it today on responsible plastic management. As you'll be aware, locally this week we had a private members bill in the Assembly, which if it passes will see us aiming at zero carbon by 2045. Which is ahead of the 2050 generally accepted targets. So clearly an important agenda point for construction, and we don't want to be found wanting in that regard. Plastic has an important part to play in the story, and that's why today we've invited Peter Marshall and Dave Garforth from Responsible Plastic Management to introduce really the concept of what responsible plastic management looks like in construction, and to give you a sense of what can be done within your businesses and your supply chains to improve your understanding of plastic and how you manage it on a daily basis, and also to see if there's work that can be done on a collective basis in Northern Ireland to improve that aspect of construction. So you're very welcome. Thank you for attending. And there's no more ado, I'm going to pass over to Peter Marshall, who's going to take us through a presentation, at the end of which there will be time for questions and answers. And what I would do is I would encourage you, if you would, to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit questions. You can do that anonymously if you wish, and I'll pose those questions for you at the end of the session. Just for information, the session is also being recorded today, and that's for those who couldn't make it, and also to share with colleagues. So, Peter, I'll hand over to you to start your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Let me just get the screen loaded up here. Can you just confirm you can see the screen, Mark?
That's perfect, Peter. Yes, indeed, we can.
Okay. Okay, that's great. Listen, thanks everybody for making time today to join us and hear what we've got to say about responsible plastic management and RPM, as we call it. I'm joined today by Dave Garforth from our team, and I suppose in summary, our background is on large-scale assurance and certification programs based on sustainability and environmental management. So our backgrounds are as ISO 14001 auditors and certifiers, and we have been working on projects over the last 20 years in about 28 different countries. So why did we want to sort of like come and talk to CEF today? So firstly, thanks to CEF for the opportunity for being able to present. And I suppose we've got 3 points of interest here. The first, we have an interest in enhancing the awareness of plastic management and the need for that. And we're seeking support across Northern Ireland, across UK, across the EU with regards to support for the programme. We have a mission, and that's to try and engage 100,000 organisations within responsible plastic management, and we'd like to be using this to offer plastic management support services and accolades for CEF members. As you'll get from today, you'll kind of like realise, if you haven't realised this as already, is how big the subject of plastic is, not just in construction but in other sectors. So we do see the potential for a potential CEF RPM Plastic in Construction Northern Ireland group. This could operate in parallel to other groups in the UK and EU, and talk about some of the items which we're going to give you a taster for today in more detail. But you'll definitely see there's quite a bit that is going on and could be talked about. So the webinar format is that we're hoping to talk for about 45 minutes. I'll give some insights to the global plastic program, which very much society has become much more aware about through different sort of like campaigns on TV and social media. Dave will then talk about plastics in the construction context, and then I'll flip back and give some background to the RPM program, what the opportunities are, what the accolades are, and what we're trying to achieve. Allowing about 15 minutes for Q&A, Likelihood is there'll be a lot of questions after this and a lot of gaps that still need to be filled. So hopefully, and the next part of the format will be our telephone ringing to sort of like answer interested parties' questions and try and get people engaged in the program. So where are we coming from? We're not coming from an anti-plastic perspective. So RPM is about plastic having its place, and recognizing that plastic is used across a number of different industries, from food, medical, transport, fashion, construction, and in terms of other environmental initiatives. So we do recognize that plastic has a lot of qualities, making some people feel that definitely plastic is a wonder product. And in the construction industry, we can identify a number of different uses of plastic, and probably 6 different plastic types make up 90% of the plastic used in the construction sector. Dave will get into this in a little bit more detail, but we understanding the need and desire for plastic within the sector. However, plastic has its place, and plastic does not belong after use in the environment and in the oceans, which is part of the problem at the minute. So, you know, plastic sounds great, and you know, people might sort of ask, what's the problem? This is a packet of Golden Wonder that was picked off one of the local beaches in the last 2 years, and it dates back, I think, to the 1960s or 70s. And the reality is, with plastic, it just doesn't go away. It's around us everywhere, and it is becoming so like highlighted as a hazard to wildlife, a hazard to water systems, and a hazard in terms of food systems and food security. So now there are an awful lot of people thinking that plastic is a major problem, both from a visual perspective, a wildlife perspective, and a human health perspective. And this is leading to a number of initiatives, a number of government development plans, which is talking about legislation and taxation and penalizing those people who put plastic onto the market and don't manage it properly. So the advice is to get get houses in order before the goalposts change and people are being asked to dramatically pay for the recycling of the products that they're putting onto the market. So at this moment in time, we still have about 90% of the plastic ever produced in our environment. And if we equate that back, that works out to about 8,000 million tons in our environment. And the big part of the problem is that we're not using that, we're not recycling that, and we're producing even more plastic, calling on fossil fuels and creating another 350 to 450 million metric tons per annum to create new plastic, ignoring the plastic that we've produced. And what that's equating to is about 8 million tons of plastic entering the oceans every year. There's a range of different recycling rates in different regions of the world. Typically, it's about 9%. And so where's this plastic going to? It can go to landfill, both here and abroad. So traditionally, or over the last decade, there was a tendency to sort of like try and ship plastic abroad for it to get sorted and recycled, in theory, in countries which had a much less cost to do that. It can be illegally dumped, either directly onto land or in the oceans. It can be put into storage, and it can be used for incineration and for energy, for waste. Now, there is some discussions in some parts, and not too far away from Northern Ireland, where people are talking about recycling equal to energy for waste, but very much in the wider discussions that using recycling and energy for waste in the same sentence is not necessarily accepted or tolerated. So what it's resulting in is a truckload of plastic being dumped into the ocean every minute of every day. And obviously this is causing some concern with regards to pollution and climate change, because fossil fuels are being used both at the creation of plastics and also in terms of at the end of life, in terms of burning of plastics to create energy. So the headline message is that business as usual is causing the plastic problem, and that business as usual needs to change and needs to adopt some responsible practices to reduce the amount of unnecessary plastic and to better manage the amount of plastic that's actually being introduced into the supply chain. So, in summary, in the first part of my presentation is that now the need for action is indisputable. It's much clearer than climate change. The metrics are very visible, even though we don't have all the information that we need, and we need to close the information gap on a lot of key areas. We have enough to say that the time to act is now, and we must be seen to be doing something about it. So construction industry is no different from any other industries. And so Dave and I also like to take through just a few headlines of the construction sector.
Thanks very much, Peter. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. So as Peter said, yeah, I'm just going to give a bit of a snapshot of plastics in the construction sector, looking at the some of the stats which are challenging enough in themselves to discover and identify on any consistent basis, and also looking at some of the challenges, and then maybe leading into some of the opportunities of how the construction sector can demonstrate responsibility in the field of plastic use management and end of use. So this slide here just gives us a snapshot of all the different types of plastic, if you look at the bottom axis, against the major sectors which use plastic within a European context. So total amount of plastic used in Europe is around about 51 million tons. These are 2017 figures actually, so it's a little bit higher at this point in time. If you look at the top on the left-hand side here, if you can see my mouse, we can see packaging is the largest consumer, the largest user of plastic. So typically called single-use plastics, because it's plastics which are used once and typically thrown away thereafter and not used again. So that's one of the biggest challenges which the plastics industry has in itself. But then if you look, of course, at the second column is building and construction or row. So building and construction is the second largest consumer of plastics from a European context, indeed also in a UK context as well. Typically representing about 20%, about 10 million tons of plastic being used. Actually, I just got an updated figure for UK total amount of plastics used in construction. It's on at about 5 million tons per annum at this point in time. And if you look at the bottom, you'll see some of the different types of polymers which that represents. And the largest polymer which represents in the construction industry is PVC, polyvinyl chloride. Most of you probably were familiar with that product, used universally in the construction sector. And then followed by some other types of plastics, something called high density polyethylene, which is this plastic here. And then looking at polystyrene and expanded polystyrene, which you'll be familiar with, particularly for insulation purposes, either for heat insulation or indeed for sound insulation as well. There's a large use of plastics in this sector. And then some of the lesser uses of plastics, polyurethane, for example, over here, and all other ranges of plastics. And then the first one here, low density polyethylene, used for things like liners, waterproof damp courses, these types of things, but also used a lot as well in single-use plastics, which has come in the form of packaging, particularly around pallets, etc., used in the construction sector for wrapping the materials that you use in construction. Thanks, Peter. So yeah, this slide Peter just put up a little bit earlier. There's 6 major plastic types, which accounts for about 90% of the total plastics used in construction. And these are some of the typical uses you'll be familiar with. So PVC I mentioned, universally a very important plastic in construction, for piping, for tubing, for guttering, for window frames, for doors, cladding and soffits, fascias, etc. All the things you'll be familiar with. For tubing as well, and lining, for cabling, for example, for insulating cables. So universally quite an important plastic used by the sector. Followed closely by high density polyethylene, used to some extent for the same purposes. And you'll probably find that if you move in different parts of the world, some parts of the world will preference high density polyethylene above PVC for certain types of use, and vice versa. So geographically, the consumption patterns change quite a lot, is due to the complexity of manufacturing in plastics. Then comes things like polyurethane and polystyrene. I mentioned particularly the expanded polystyrene used for thermal and acoustic insulation, and then polypropylene, another type of plastic used for piping, tubing, guttering. A lot of liquids also are contained in polypropylene because it's a very inert plastic. And then finally, low density linear low density polyethylene, used not just in packaging, but of course used by the industry as well for things like waterproofing, lining, sealing for waterproofing in roofing, etc. Now, one of the positive things we can say about plastic used in construction is it tends not to be single-use plastic, and thereby it has a much longer shelf life, much longer use life than single-use plastics. And this curve here just shows you the average use life of construction plastics, which is on and around about 35 years. So yeah, plastics used in construction, its use life is about 35 years, and you'll see at the top of that graph some other plastics which have a lower lifespan, typically things like flooring, because it's more harder wearing, of course, and vinyl flooring, for example, may have a use life of around 10 to 15 years. And then some of the plastics used for such as sort of like high density polyethylene and PVC piping, which are used for things like water delivery systems, have a much longer lifespan, and these can range up to 100 years. Now, I was reading recently, actually, some of this might be because some of those plastics are just left in the ground and not extracted, typically because it's expensive to do so. So that might explain why they may be factored in as a much longer use life. Thanks, Peter. So yeah, this is some waste figures from the UK. So really what I want to say about this slide is that it's quite complicated. And these are some clever people from the University of Cambridge who have been trying to break down the flow of plastics used in construction in the UK. This is a report done in 2020, but they were using data sets which ranged from 2014 to 2017. That's because typically it's very challenging to get uniform data sets in any one set time period to sort of like base the analysis on. And that's a difficult and challenging thing we've got to manage across all types of plastic construction. And that's typically because, particularly in construction, it's a very diverse sector in terms of plastic manufacturing, from the resin producers, from the formers of plastics, the plastic producers that assemble plastic and put those materials together. Then, of course, in terms of the contractors, in terms of construction and use of plastics. And that's even before you start looking at the waste end and how plastics are dealt with at the end of life. So it becomes very complicated. I guess one point to raise on this slide, I know there's some figures there, that the 2014 figure says the recycled plastic it was around about 52,000 tons at that point in time. Now that might sound quite good, but if you put it in the context of the modern day, where plastics in the UK construction sector is now running about 5 million tons, but of course that represents just 1% of the total. It may have increased a little bit from that, in fairness, but of course, even if you look at the global average Peter presented there, about 9% of total plastics being recycled, it's still an underachieving sector compared to hopefully where we could take the sector. So these are some waste figures again from Europe then. And really what I want to mention here is the key plastics used in construction sector. And you can see the PVC plastics there, and you can see the breakdown of what is the current fate of plastics at the end of life. And you'll see in but from a positive point of view, there is a certain quantity that's recycled. That's the green part of the bar you can see there. But you can also see a good third of all those plastics, and in sometimes a greater majority than a third, leading up to a half for some of those types of plastics, are either incinerated or indeed are landfilled. So it's still not a great picture in terms of where we could be heading with plastics and doing a better job in terms of recycling. And this doesn't even present some of the what might be considered as low-hanging fruit in opportunities for the construction sector. When you think, and this is just some figures we were playing around with, if there was around 5 million people working in construction, this is probably going back to pre-COVID-19 times, and each one of those persons uses around 100 throwaway bottles a year just for personal use. That's 500 million uses, if you like, or 500 million bottles, which are thrown away in the European construction sector alone. I think the figure for UK is 2 million tons pre-COVID-19. So again, enormous opportunity to look at solutions. So what are the drivers for change towards plastic responsibility in construction? Well, legislation and taxes, and you're probably aware of this already, and you may have already know that there will be a tax introduced for single-use plastic packaging. Now that tax will be presented to the producers of plastic packaging, as the current PRNs are, where they buy credit notes, if you like. But all of these will be passed on, as they are today, to their user sectors. And some of the figures I was reading recently, I think the cost, if you like, of waste disposal of single-use plastic packaging has gone up 8-fold in the last 3 or 4 years, and it's set to increase again with these levies and taxes which are being introduced. Some of these taxes are offering incentives as well. For example, the tax will be £200 per tonne on any plastics that don't contain a minimum of 30% recycled content. So yeah, policies is being brought in to introduce incentives for across the entire supply chain for plastics. Environmental group pressures, of course, is another important factor, and it's probably something which we're more familiar with within other sectors, particularly in retailing, where environmental groups pretty much put a lot of pressure on retailers to behave responsibly, not just in plastics, but in lots of types of things that they procure. But you can imagine the same thing, and because the society's raised awareness around the plastic problem, it will be coming on all sectors, including construction. And of course, that affects everybody's brand reputation, which can affect also investor support in this sector. As well as things like, moving on to the next one, looking at already procurement requirements requiring for contractors to offer some type of green credentials, some kind of pass mark that they are behaving responsibly towards the environment. And then other things like carbon, as Peter mentioned earlier as well, critical challenges, if you wish, and probably big game changers in terms of how plastics will be managed into the future. So, solutions. Recycled plastics are being used in this industry for sure. And there's a lot of solutions which are there, and examples of solutions which are being used where recycled plastics are used as feedstocks back into the construction sector. And indeed, the construction sector is taking its waste plastics and have them recycled as well. Now, there's terminology here. One is called upcycling and one is called downcycling around this word recycling. And typically a lot of plastics which come off the construction sector are downcycled. So they're used for lesser quality goods because of the quality of the plastic used in the first place. But there are examples of upcycling as well. This next slide just sort of places recycling into context, and that's, if you look at this slide at the end in green there, end of life. But of course, before you get to that point of end of life recycling, there's lots of other opportunities to look at reducing and look at swapping out, if you wish, from plastics to other types of materials, and looking at more effective use of plastics from building design all the way through to optimizing material properties, reducing waste, improving management on sites, and extending building lifetimes. And each one of these particular areas in itself, of course, is a discussion group. It's a forum in itself, but I think it's important to look at the big picture and connect each of these aspects together as part of a total solution for the construction sector. and indeed working in some of those areas such as designing plastics better for recycling will of course have a positive effect on the ability to recycle plastics at the end. So these are some circular economy examples, which some of you may be familiar with already. So circular economy really means when in the world of plastics, means when the plastic is recycled back into the product that it was actually made of in the first place. So you have a circular economy, if you wish. So more than downcycling, in other words. And some of these are examples such as Paint 360, for example. I didn't realize myself that something like 55 million litres of paint are wasted every year in the UK alone. There's a company called Paint 360 that's looking at repurposing that paint and also recycling the paint tubs that it comes from. RecoFloor is a vinyl take-back scheme which is operating in the UK. It's also actually in Ireland as well. They have a facility in Belfast as well in Northern Ireland. So there are solutions available. Recon Vinyl, another one on the bottom there, from the initiative from Vinyl Plus, again an initiative for polyvinyl chloride, which is the PVC sector itself finding its own solutions and resolving some of the legacy issues with lead, with cadmium in their PVC, which made it near impossible for recycling solutions to be brought forward. So certainly there are solutions there. So what are the challenges in the construction sector? Well, I think the biggest challenge is gaps in data. This uncertainty about the amounts and types and applications of plastic. But there's some fundamental positives here. 90% of all the plastics used in construction are, in theory, recyclable. So all those resins we just spoke about are recyclable in theory. But plastic recycling and reuse is a business just like any other business. So it requires economies of scale, it requires effective collection systems, sorting systems, and it requires a market for the recycled plastic when it is recycled at the end of its life as well, for these solutions to come to effect. And that means that total supply chain solution needs to be in place. So yeah, more information is needed to close the gaps, and this is really where we want to engage with the construction sector, with yourselves, to offer an opportunity to bring some of these initiatives together and look at opportunities to create discussion forums around these different aspects. And we believe that by bringing the sector together and collating information in that way, it'll be a much better way of solving the gap, finding better solutions which work at scale, and delivering something that, of course, supports the industry moving forward. I think that's about the last slide for me, Peter, I think, is it?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So, as you can sort of see, there are a multiple of sort of different topics. We could probably do 10 different webinars on 10 different subject matters with regards to, taxation, penalties, and then through to the alternatives and initiatives and stuff coming through. So, the question comes back is to say, well, what kind of company? We have a number of companies that are involved in the group here today. And, the idea is to become more aware of plastics within the sector, within the organization, within the operations, and to understand what the alternatives and recycling initiatives are out there. To try and understand the plastic impact of each of those different operations, and perhaps set some realistic targets and controls in terms of what can be done. What we've indicated is taxation is coming, penalties is coming. So if you don't know the information, there'll be a sort of general assumption made that things are perhaps not necessarily in control, and taxation and penalties could potentially be a lot higher. So that's why we're sort of suggesting it's a good time to get things into some order and understand what the problem is, if there is one, and to engage any necessary parties within a plan, and understanding the use of contractors within the construction sector. So, it's possible to do something as a company. We see some of the larger companies doing some very good things. Mace Group in the UK has got some very good examples of what they're doing on a company basis. It's the potential to do things as a group or do things as a sector. And I suppose that's where we come in from the RPM program, is that, you know, we would like to sort of like try and see what is the interest in the sector, looking at some of the potentials from the information that might be out there, that collectively we can turn over a lot of stones and find out some information which may lead to economies of scale, which may lead to solutions. You know, sometimes when we go into a sector, we're asked, you know, various questions of what do you do about this plastic? What do you do about this clip? What do you do about this, you know, band? And the question is, you know, what's the metrics behind that? What, you know, what's the volume? So if we can come together as a group in terms of whether it's collection, whether it's sorting, whether it's reuse, we're in a much better place. So RPM, we're a social enterprise. We're a community business with a big mission. Our mission is to lead with awareness with regards to plastics, to try and reduce down the unnecessary plastic use. And we have a big ambition to get about 100,000 organizations involved in the program. Now, we're not a construction industry initiative. We are cross-sector. And at this moment in time, we have everything from aerospace to workspace engaged within the program. And we think that's a good thing, because there's some cross-pollination of ideas and initiatives that may be sort of like, you know, given and taken from some of these different sectors. And within some of these sectors, we have developed what we call these plastic in. So we have a plastic in seafood sector group. We think it's a good idea to have a plastic in construction NI group to see what can be realized from collective engagement. So RPM, it's deliberately plastic centric, and given our last 20 years of experience, we've designed this that it's complementary and not contradictory to other initiatives that's going on. So we come very much from the ISO 14001 environmental management standard certification basis. We're aware of business in the community, environmental initiatives, and EnviroCert environmental initiatives, and there will be net zero and climate management initiatives. And we think that's a great thing, and it moves everybody forward towards where we would like them to be. And with regards to the certification, certainly people who have ISO 14001 or environmental management systems are much closer to having a structure and system that might lend itself to our RPM standard. So we want to engage with things that are going at the minute and not be in conflict with them, but to complement them. And we're all about sort of like trying to give accolades for where people are. So again, over our experience in the last 20 years, we've seen that people like to focus on some milestones rather than just an endpoint. So we have an accolade for organizations that get involved at an early stage to say we're keen and committed to move this thing forward. And we'll move forward to potential training, for which there's accolades, through to certification, which is a business-to-business communication that can be translated through. Like everything else, we've moved, we've moved very much online. We have the ability to deliver, support, coaching, and training online, and we're keen to promote the organizations that have actually come on board and are moving forward. Another key thing that we understand is important to do is to get partnerships and alliances forming with us. So we're getting government groups, non-government groups, retail, public service, research, other initiatives together in order that we're in alignment for them for benchmarking, and we don't have the questions, well, I'm in this initiative, does that contradict with the RPM initiative? And so we're trying to get this boiled down in real terms, in terms of local partnerships. So I'm a local of the North Coast, and therefore I've been helping set up this North Coast World Earth and try and direct them in a way that we've got kids on the ground collecting litter, but it's done in a way that actually everybody's gaining from this. The environment is gaining something from this. The kids are getting awareness of plastics, but it's not to substitute them in as litter pickers. We want to get sort of like corporates involved in this as well to understand what are the implications for what they're doing in society and in the environment. So at the end of the journey, or towards the end of the journey, it's third-party certification, and this is delivered by third-party certification bodies such as Control Union, Lloyd's Register, SGS, are just coming on board, as well as other certification bodies coming on board. So it doesn't have to be restricted to one certification body. There will be a choice of certification bodies out there, but it's all against the one standard. So we see RPM as a development journey, moving from commitment, moving to realization of what the plastics are, and measurement, moving forward to action plans, and moving forward to having some results from those action plans. And that leads us to evidence for certification. And then in terms of what the program does, is it tries to help and coach and offer assistance through different mechanisms to allow companies to move forward from that initial commitment journey through to certification. So we have organizations that have come on and said, listen, I don't want to talk about certification now, I just want to be doing something. And that's fine. They can come in and start their journey and move forward. And then we have other organizations who have ISO 14001, have SEDEX, have some, multiple of certifications. And it's a case of, I just want to move straight to certification, and that's fine. That's fine as well. We just want to keep organizations moving forward positively and constructively. So we believe this is a low cost, relatively low cost entry point. So it starts at about £250 per registered unit per year. And what that offers is access to the RPM partner logo and certificate that you're a partner, and a listing as RPM engaged within the program and website. And that leads to access to guidance tools. And what we've been talking about is this plastic in construction group feasibility. And if we can get enough members within the construction industry in Northern Ireland, we'd like to formulate that group. And that's in conjunction with CEF, or alongside CEF or whatever, but we're keen to do that. And we offer the development opportunity to certified status. It's not an absolute criteria that you have to go for certified status, but we like to be thinking that people will get there eventually. The minimum commitment that we expect from the companies is, at this stage, is that they adopt a plastic policy and commitment statement. And again, we can help with that, and we can help in terms of move the organizations forward. We then have a certification entry point, and that's the partner cost plus a certification body audit cost. So when it comes to certification, the certification body engages with the client directly, and depending on size and scale, works out what the cost for certification is going to be. It's likely, given what we know about certification, to be similar in the costs for ISO 14000, ISO 14001. So around £1,500 would probably a good estimate for a medium-sized organization. The certified organizations get the certification logo and access to use that on all the promotional material, and they become listed on the certified directory. The minimum commitment from that, which is similar to the EnviroWise, is that they must be verified as meeting the RPM standard on an annual basis. So why have organizations joined RPM? And we, as I said before, we have everything from aerospace through to design, through to IT, through to legal, through to recruitment, through to pharma, fishing, manufacturing, through to workplace. And we have organizations that are saying we want to be seen as a good place to work, a good organization who cares about the environment. We have other organizations that are saying we want to be seen as a good place to work. So for example, Workspace want to encourage organizations into their environment, and want to be sort of like seeing that, you know, they're keen to have these green credentials. So, you know, we summarize this in it meaning a better environment for you, your organization, the future generations, some organizational pride, a demonstration of leadership and commitment, protecting the organization that you work for, because, you know, there are procurement policies that are now coming out both in the private and public side that's going to focus towards plastic. They focused towards environment previously. Now they're starting to be specific about climate and the likes of plastics. So it does help protect the organization to put the best foot forward, and sort of like demonstrate that it's making efforts in the given specification of plastic. And again, a good place to work as a team. We do have two sort of like key construction members from the Northern Ireland construction sector in terms of Graham's and Tobermore, and certainly we would like more. You know, we really appreciate the invite from Mark to come and talk to the group, and because we are a cross-sectoral group. It didn't necessarily, before the conversation with Mark, we didn't think, right, we could look at construction as a given target, but very much welcomed his invite to come along and talk to you as a group, and then sort of like thinking we could be doing something as a group together, if we get a collective membership and talk about scale of opportunity and use some of our networks to really share the knowledge about what's going on in academia, what's going on in research, what's going on in recycling initiatives, and what's going on in the markets. So, you know, through the presentation, we hope that we have at least raised the awareness of plastic in the wider context and within the construction context. We would like to offer any organization an RPM entry point, and we have very small organizations within RPM, and we have very large organizations within RPM. So it doesn't matter what type of organization or what scale you are, there is a place for you within the RPM program, and you can contact us via our email at info@rpmprogram.com. We do see the potential for a plastic in construction group. We understand from Mark that there is likely to be a climate group under CEF, but really plastic in itself it's a topic in itself, and you know, we're happy if there was interest and people joined in terms of the membership of the RPM program to try and facilitate some form of collective, and also to run this in parallel with what's going on in the UK and also in the EU, and bring some information back and maybe sort of like try and facilitate some of the things that could happen within the industry. So we're here to assist. We're here to answer any questions. And either now in the next sort of like 10 or so minutes or after, you can follow up with us with questions. So thanks very much for your time again.
Peter and Dave, that's great. Thanks very much. It's really a good run through. It gives us a really good flavour of what you're offering there. And I think rightly, as you say there at CF, we're going to be contacting our members very shortly, looking for volunteers for Northern Ireland Construct Zero group. We'll be working on the back of the CLC Construct Zero plan, which was released in the last couple of weeks, but we always have Northern Irelandisms. We're very good at those here. We need to make sure that fits what we want to achieve here, but we also want to be proactive about it. We want to be part of the development of UK Construction's Construct Zero plans rather than just waiting for them to happen. And there's still a lot of good work going on amongst members on the ground. I'm really interested, Peter, just from the point of view of entry points, because I know looking at our attendee list today, with some of the largest companies in Northern Ireland on the call, but we equally have some SMEs and family businesses. And I always feel it's those businesses who very high ideals, but maybe not great resources, particularly in terms of time to achieve these accolades that you talk about. So just be interested maybe about, you know, for the smaller business, what sort of input is required
Yeah,
towards the journey?
Yeah. So as I sort of like said, it's the entrance point for us is commitment from an organization to set the intention to become more aware of plastics and to set some sort of like set some controls for it. So there's no, we don't have a sort of like time milestone metric that somebody needs to get to at a certain point by a certain time. We have experience of other sustainability programs where people are allowed to hang around in a zombie type fashion where they don't actually move on with anything. So we have sort of like created this, that it has a low financial entry point, in terms of £250 or a few £100 for some of the larger organizations. Could be the sort of like cost of a stationery order. Now, if you have some large print cartridges, when I look at our stationery orders, sometimes I think, wow, what happened there? So construction is different from some of the other sectors that we have looked at, because we have construction sites that emerge and then last for a certain while, and then they move on to the next construction site. So we would be open, to discussing with through yourselves as an umbrella, through some of the organizations, in terms of what does the organization membership, what could it look like? Is it wanting to be from a company head office perspective or site specific? But certainly the cost of setting up a policy, setting up some awareness, and setting up some headline targets is not expensive. What we can offer is some assistance with regards to what does a plastic register look like. How do you go through the situation, looking at the types of plastic and what are the plastics and what are the alternatives. So we're there to try and give some basic tools to say, here's some direction towards what you can be doing. But yes, we do appreciate that, some of the organizations, or even if they're large, they're across a number of different sites, and there's a certain amount of practicalities that can be done, and there's a certain amount of practicalities that can't be done. There's some emerging IT programs that are out there to help organizations pull information together. So anything that we can do to steer organizations across to those, we'll do so. But from our perspective, it costs a few £100 to stay within the program, and for that we'll try and offer tools and information that'll help them on their way.
Okay, thanks for that. We have a question here, because you did make reference to some guidance tools you'd be using. The question really is asking, what areas of a company or a business would you be assessing or looking at to help them achieve plastic sustainability?
Yeah, so in tools, I'm hoping I can maybe I can go back onto my slide deck there again. But there was a slide there that kind of like indicates. Can you see my slide deck again?
Yes, that's fine. We can see that.
Yeah. So if I go back onto this, just a little bit sticky. Yeah, we have defined some of the key pillars of the program, which ranges from commitment through to measurement and action. So we can help with some of the development of the policies, and yeah, so this is it here. Oops. Yeah, so in terms of developing policies, and really the policy is typically straightforward, that somebody might already have an environmental policy and they just need to sort of like extrapolate that to cover the scope of plastics. But sometimes it comes down to the plastic registers and the action plans, in terms of are they plastic aware, even in terms of what are the plastics and quantities that are actually being used within the system, both by themselves and potentially by other contractors, and to sort of like try and work out some reduction action plan. So we're not selling digital services, but we can point people towards other sort of like service providers that may offer different types of coaching or digital services that might help pull the information together. But what we're about is trying to facilitate these pillars to be developed, and then enough evidence for verification that those pillars are in place, that we can actually certify that the organization is doing what it can. So we do have certain situations where an organization has said to us that they don't have an immediate solution for an alternative to what they're doing. And as long as that's sort of like identified, a bit like the environmental management system, it's identified and there's an action plan to try and sort of like do some investigation around it over a given period, we still believe that they're within the responsible plastic management framework and mindset. So this is, trying to help people at different levels define different signposts to give them a practical and pragmatic solution.
Okay, thanks for that. Dave, I have a question for you here. You made mention of a couple of schemes about vinyls and flooring and so on. The question just is, are those live and applicable in Northern Ireland, or are those just English schemes at the moment?
They are well, certain ones are. Reconcile, which is a scheme set up for recycling of vinyl flooring, is available. They have collection sites in Belfast. The company also says that if you have a certain quantity, they will send out their collection bags to your site. So you can obviously sort them, and then then you can phone and get them collected. Now I don't know what the cost breakdown of that is, but again, if you read their words, they say they're around about 70% of the cost of the current cost of landfill, which would include, say, hiring of a skip on a site as well, and then have that skip taken away for landfill for that material. Now they do have a high quality specification to that, so the material that you're giving them has to have a certain quality grade. So in terms of its cleanliness, so they tend to focus, I think, on offcuts and trimmings from new construction sites rather than recovered material, although they will handle recovered material if it meets the specification. So yeah, it's probably worth looking at the website and considering maybe. So some of the other ones, Vinyl Plus, yeah, is a European-wide initiative set up by the PVC supply sector, manufacturing supply sector. It's been running for nearly 20 years now, actually. It originally set up to, as I think I mentioned, to deal with some of the legacy issues and try and it's a policy, but a lobbying body as well, to deal with things like lead, chloride, cadmium, things like this in PVC, which they've done a good job on in terms of removing and reducing to the point where they've got better recycled opportunities for PVC. And that's been increasing year on year on. Now, I know there's recyclers in the UK, about 15 of them, but I'm not aware of anyone in Northern Ireland that is a member of Vinyl Plus and their monitoring service, which is the other people, which I think is on the slide as well.
Okay, so again, that could just be a matter of scale. Maybe if an interest was identified,
I think it likely is.
More services available.
Just absolutely, and for all of these different initiatives, that's what they will look for. They will look for business opportunities, of course, yeah, for them to work, which is, and as, following on from what Peter says, the solutions are not instantly available all the time. What we're looking for is progress. We're looking for continuous improvement and commitment, and with respect to the RPM program, because we're recognizing the fact that there are a lot of challenges there, and bringing groups and businesses and sectors together, we see as the opportunity to try and deliver some of that economy of scale, collective thinking, if you like, in terms of what solutions does a sector want to pursue, because there could be multiple different options available, and it's really about saying, okay, let's work with one solution that we feel confident in and try and make that work for us. So yeah.
Well, thanks for that. Just another question, probably a bit generic, but just asking what are the quick wins in the early days if people want to demonstrate their responsible plastic management? What is the easiest routes to market, I suppose, to demonstrate some progress?
Yeah, I'll jump in, Dave, because what we have had is we have had some organizations that jumped onto the RPM program because they basically said, you're going to help me communicate what we're doing. So there are organizations there that are doing some good stuff, and it's not necessarily translating in some ways. I think in terms of for those who haven't started anything. I suppose, one of the first things is to start association with some type of initiative that from the outside perspective gives them visibility. The becoming plastic aware and starting to sort of like identify what plastics are what. So that's why we've been trying to show different accolades to say, I'm engaged. That's good. Okay, here's an accolade. You can get the trend, you can get the trend accolade, which is to basically say we've put through. So we have some, for example, IT companies that have put through, now plastic training as part of their induction process for new staff, sort of like coming through. But what we're sort of like hoping is that, the quick wins are realizing that, what is being thrown out is an asset in some ways, could have a value. And now, taken as an individual, there may not be the economies of scale, but taken as a conversation piece where we turn around and say, well, if X amount of contractors are actually, having the same problem, we could potentially join that together and have a conversation with somebody where it becomes where it becomes a solution. So we're interested in protecting the environment. So preparing yourself for sorting, for grading is a good thing, because the better it's sorted, the better it's graded, the more chance is that it's going to end up in the proper place for recycling. It offers the best opportunity for it not to end up in the commons or in the oceans. And so that's a good thing. If people can look towards recycling, it's a recycled product, it's going to mean less call on plastic from virgin plastic. So there's a win for the environment, there's a win for the company, and they can be kind of like co-joined together. And this is what we're sort of like trying to offer out, is this way of communicating to say, I'm doing something within the realms of practicality in terms of what I can do.
Fantastic. Well, listen, guys, I'm very conscious it's nudging on 3 o'clock, and we did promise we'd be done by 3, but listen, thank you both very much for that presentation. Greatly illuminating to those of us who don't know as much as we should know about plastics. We're extending the offer there if members are interested to get in contact with yourselves, and we'll be sharing the details again after today. The recording will be also shared and will be available. But we look forward to continuing the conversation. Hope this is the start of a journey to look at plastics in construction. We thank you all for attending today. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.